Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Audit Committee meeting of Hertfordshire County Council, today, Tuesday, the 23rd of March, 2021. I have some chairman's announcements, as usual. So it relates to COVID-19 and attendance at this meeting. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there's a link on the Council's website for them to do so. Members of the Council are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphones off once they have finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish. If you experience connection or other technical issues, it may help to switch your camera off. Cameras should be switched on if and when speaking in the meeting. To indicate a wish to speak, members should use the raised hand function, and use of the meeting chat function is exclusively for voting. At the end of the debate on each item of business, there will be a vote. Members should vote using the meeting chat function by indicating for, against, or abstain. I will declare the result after each vote. Breaks of 15 minutes will be held every 2 hours and will be taken after a speaker in the debate has finished speaking. If we're voting, the vote will be concluded if we're voting, the vote will be concluded before the break is taken. Other breaks will be incorporated as appropriate. And today is exceptional in respect that the Council is supporting the National Day of Reflection to mark the first anniversary of Britain going into lockdown. The commemoration has been organised by charity Marie Curie to remember the 125,000 people who have died during the COVID-19 pandemic, including some of our own staff members and care service users. Throughout the day, the flag at County Hall will fly at half-mast, and during the evening, the building will be lit up as a mark of remembrance. All councillors have been invited to join staff in observing a minute's silence at 12 noon to remember those who have lost their lives. For members of this committee and for officers, a reminder will be provided shortly before 12 noon, and we will observe 1 minute's silence. So now we turn to the meeting itself, and I'm going to invite members to introduce themselves. I'll go first. I'm Frances Button. I'm the County Councillor for Rickmansworth East and Oxley Park, and I'm chairing this committee. So, Simon Bloxham.
Good morning, my name is Simon Bloxham and I'm the County Councillor for Letchworth North.
Thank you. John Graham.
Good morning, I'm John Graham. I'm the County Councillor for Potters Bar East.
John Hale.
Good morning, I'm the County Councillor for Cody Heath and Marshalswick.
Ian Ray.
Good morning, I'm the member for Berkhamsted in West Hertfordshire.
Sharon Taylor.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the County Councillor for Bedwell Division in Stevenage.
Tim Williams.
Good morning, everybody. It's Councillor Tim Williams here, member for Woodside Stanborough Audit, which is in North Watford area.
William Wyatt-Lowe.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the County Councillor for Hemel Hempstead Town.
John Wiley.
Good morning, John Wiley from Bishop Stortford East.
And Paul Zhukowski.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Zhukowski and I'm the County Councillor for Hatfield South.
Thank you all very much. And I think you have all now received a note on the actions from the minutes of the meeting of the 8th of December, which were circulated by email prior to the meeting. So I'm going to move on to the minutes themselves, and I'm going to invite members to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the most recent meeting. My chairman's note has got the wrong date on it. I think we're confirming the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of December. Before we do, there is a typo, so we will amend the typo, and it's in 7.3 and we'll have the word took instead of to. But other than that, are members happy to confirm the minutes? Can we all vote in the chat?
Chair, if it's okay, if I could just make a comment in relation to the minutes. It doesn't relate to the approval of them. It was just an associated comment to them.
I'd be happy if you would. And Scott, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes.
So that people from the outside know who you are as well? Yes, yeah, of course.
Well, thank you, Councillor Button. So yes, my name's Scott Crudgington, and I'm the Director of Resources at the County Council. It was just to mention there was some references across the minutes relating to the Redmond review, which is undertaken about the whole of sort of governance and the way that audit, etc., should be undertaken across the local government. As part of that review, there was very much a strong signal that we should be considering the appointment of independent audit committee individuals to be brought forward, to be recruited from within our community. And so as a result of those recommendations, and certainly it's good practice that CIPFA have been promoting for a number of years now, it's my proposal that we will now be looking in the new municipal year to look to select an independent member to join the audit committee, subject to full council agreeing some constitutional changes that will be necessary at the AGM this year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. I think it's important that we recognise the significance of the Redmond review. So thank you very much for that, and a helpful comment. So I'm now going to move on to item 2, but I am going to make a quick reference. Usually we have the financial items at the beginning. This time, EY, our auditors, have had a separate commitment which we completely respect, which started before our meeting. So we've moved the finance items down to the end of the agenda in order to accommodate them and all of our officers as well. So we move to item 2, the risk management update report, and I'm going to invite Fiona Timms, risk and insurance manager, to present the report. And I know Fiona had her vaccination yesterday. Fiona, I hope you're feeling well. I'm sure you are.
Yes.
And hooray of another vaccination. That's great.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to run through the highlights in this particular report. First of all, starting with the table on 1.6 on page 18, that sort of summarises the main changes to the risks that we are reporting to this committee. So it's got a highlight of the numbers that have changed. All of the risks that we've changed are included in the appendix in full. So the full information on all of these changed risks are included in that appendix. I do have to make a correction to a paragraph in this report, as unfortunately the wrong risk information has been put forward. The error is in the wording under 1.15.2, which is on page 27. Although the heading there is correct and relates to the correct risk, the actual narrative is for the wrong risk. So I do apologise for that. The narrative, I'm just going to tell you what it should say, and obviously the full risk is in the appendix and is correct. The narrative should say, as a result of the global pandemic, the virus has had a damaging impact upon Hertfordshire's communities and its economy. Given this, there is a risk that future investment in the Hertfordshire economy will be lower, economic growth will be slower, and recovery will take longer to achieve, affecting the short, medium and longer term prosperity of Hertfordshire communities. So that is the change that needs to be made to this particular report. So apologies for that.
Could you just remind us what the reference number for that risk was?
It's I've got it down as do I call it SEO8 or SEO6?
Exactly.
It's the right one in that the reference is in 1.15.2, so it's SEO8. So that is the wording for SEO8 that I just read out.
Thank you very much for your clarification.
Thank you. As members are aware, we divide the risks into two sort of headings, the first being our strategic risks and the second being our corporate risks. So I'm going to take through the change to the strategic risks first of all, and the key changes are as follows, and I will work through the table that is on page 22 of the agenda pack, which starts section 1.9. So I'm just going to highlight the changes that have happened within that table there. The first one is a new risk that replaces that with extreme weather, and that relates to our climate crisis that we have identified and has been approved by the council, and that is obviously about the sustainability programme, etc., that we've now got in place to try and manage that risk as far as possible. There is obviously a sustainability programme and action plan to try and ensure that we manage that risk. So that is risk that has been given a code number of SE07 or ENV0159. The next risk that we have added again is a refocused risk, and that is SE06, which relates to infrastructure funding that we required in order to respond to the growth agenda within Hertfordshire. Obviously, there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be put in place to support the growth that is expected over the coming years. And this replaces the previous SIL and Section 106 risk that we had. So it's a replacement or refocused risk that we have there. The next new risk is SEO8 or ENV0161, which is again as a result of the pandemic, and this is one that I highlighted the changes to earlier. So this is the change to the paragraph in the report. As a result of the pandemic, there's obviously a bit of an economic crisis that we need to respond to, and that we will be working with our partners in the LEP, etc., to try and support the recovery of the economy post-pandemic within Hertfordshire. The next risk that I need to refer you to is on page 21, which is about the withdrawal from the EU and the impacts that we've still got to sort of follow through from that. Obviously, we're hoping that those are now coming through, and we're understanding what the impacts of the EU are, and so that risk has been reduced. There are two new risks that have been added and are within the ownership of the Deputy Director of Community Protection. The first one is SCP-10, which relates to the training facilities and the development at Longfields. And the second one relates to the failure or delivery against the IRMP proposals that Community Protection are working through. So those are the changes to the strategic risks. Moving on to the changes to the corporate risks, they start on page 23 of the pack. And the first one is an increase in the possible failure of care providers. Now that was added and commented on at the height of the second wave in January, when some of the care homes were struggling, particularly some of the private care homes, with staffing numbers. So we did have to support those particular care homes through that particular period. So that is why that is showing an increase in probability there. Obviously, we've got Hearts at Home, our own company, that will help us to support in those circumstances. The second one is about, which is R17 or CSH F0016, which is about the risk of not developing sufficient proposals to set a balanced budget. Clearly, a balanced budget has now been set for the forthcoming year, so the likelihood of that risk has been reduced. Another reduction in respect of a funding type risk is about the uncertainty of ACS funding, which you'll see is AC11, and that is referred to on page 24. Obviously, there's sufficient provision at the moment relating to ACS funding. We do have obviously reliance on partners to fund some of the ACS work, so that is why it's shown slightly differently to the other finance type risks. There is, unfortunately, a bit of an increase, as I'm sure that you'll hear later on within the meeting, is about the risk that the council may experience significant fraud, and that as a result of some of the more fraudulent activities that have been coming forward following the pandemic. So those are the key changes within the report. Sorry, that was a quick gallop through for everybody. That's a summary of the key changes, and I'm happy to take any questions and obviously an observation for the next risk focus report that you may wish to see at your next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's interesting how much things have changed over the year because of COVID, because therefore the impact on finance, certainly the impact on fraud, which is, as you said, we will be picking up later. Just a quick comment. You mentioned ACS, and for those coming in from outside, ACS is Adult Care Services. But thank you again for reminding us of the trading company Hearts at Home, by which we're securing continuity of care providers. So thank you very much for that. So much is changing. I'm going to open this to questions and comments. And somehow my screen has changed, so I'm very much... Ah, there we go. Something happened. Right. I'm looking at comments. I haven't seen any hands up. Sharon, I'm sorry it took me a while to find you. I've just spotted that your hand is up, and I'm sure there are some others as well.
Yeah, I don't think I was first, Chairman, but I'm happy to go first if you want me to.
You're still the only one I can see, so if others are content that you can go first.
I'll go, and then other people can chip in as well. Thank you for the detailed report, and as we come to the end of this term of County Council, we are in very unusual times because of COVID, and we can see that written large in the risk management update, I think. First of all, I wanted to comment on, I don't know whether the change that was mentioned to SE08 answers my question, but the overall risk of recovery and of Hertfordshire not addressing the recovery as quickly as not that we're not addressing it, but that it doesn't happen as quickly as we would want it to. I couldn't see that kind of consolidated into one risk, and I just wanted to ask if have I missed that, or is it spread over a number of the risks in the report? And that may have been answered by the comments about SE08. I'm not sure. The second one was around adult care. We mentioned in our resources panel and at the budget time the increasing risk to adult care providers, and I hear your words about Hearts at Home, Chair. My view would be that the mitigation for adult care service failure and the long-term plan would be a very good area for the new audit committee to look at as we go into the new term of the County Council. It's been an increasing risk and really accelerated by what's happened this year. Working out what the mitigation is for that risk of adult care service failure, I think is really important. And just lastly, I'm very pleased to see SE07 on page 27, an all-encompassing risk of not achieving the climate change aims, I think is very appropriate at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Fiona, would you like to comment on SE08 and adult care services? Mitigation of ACS would be helpful as well, and SE07. Thank you.
SE08 is the risk of the pandemic and the slow economic recovery, and what we're doing to support recovery. So the work with the LEP and other interested partners throughout the county to support recovery, obviously through the districts and boroughs as well as through the LEP. So the great partnership working that will need to be undertaken to try and ensure a robust recovery is included within risk SE08. The other about mitigation actions, yes, we can look into ensure that those are robustly looked at within the controls for the risk of care home providers. I think there's quite a bit of detail in that one, but I can't recall all of them at the moment. But yes, there are some controls, and those are included within the agenda pack and the actual risk description. So yes, I take your point. It's not only about Hearts at Home. There are other things that we need to be doing to ensure that our care providers are supported and can continue to function. So Sharon, I will take, sorry, Councillor Taylor, I will take that forward and make sure that we have adequate controls within there to try and support care providers going forward. I know there's a lot of work that's been done by adult care. We see that within the bulletins that go out to members quite regularly in terms of what we've been doing in terms of support for the pandemic for those care providers. So yes, I'll ensure that the controls for that risk are looked at and ensure they're robust. Thank you.
And SE07 on page 27. It was the strategic risk, SE07.
Oh, is this the new one about climate change?
Chair, while the officer's looking that up, the point about this was when we discussed the climate change strategy, or the sustainability strategy, which was very comprehensive and very good, there were some questions about where that was going to be monitored in the county council and how because that is the mitigation to this. And I don't recall hearing whether that was resolved, where this climate change risk overall is going to be monitored.
That's a helpful question, because of course we're still putting in place, the county council is still putting in place the action plan. So perhaps that is still premature in terms of our looking at it. But where do we know where it's going to be monitored and controlled?
I must admit, I obviously don't know where the whole of the monitoring will be taking place in terms of how we're delivering against the sustainability plan. I'm afraid I don't know that detail. Obviously, I can try and find that out and report back to the committee as to where that sort of is being monitored and looked at by the council. So I will follow that one up if that's acceptable.
That would be helpful. I think we'd all like I'm going to say a written reply, which sounds formal, but certainly an email reply giving us that detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then I have now the chat has popped up, not the chat, the hands up. So I've now got in order John Hale, Ian Ray and Tim Williams. So for those of you who found that Sharon was queue jumping you, my apologies, blame technology. Over to John Hale.
I have no problems if Sharon did queue jump. My question is on the strategic risk 06, which is ENVO 149 on Appendix A. This is the one to do with the funding for infrastructure. The appendix shows the current risk score as severe 40, which my understanding of this report is after taking into account all the control measures the council currently has in place to manage that risk. The target risk score is shown as significant 12, and all the control measures listed as being available to bring the current risk in line with the target are shown as in place and embedded. So my question is if we assess the current risk as 40 and we've got all our controls in place and embedded, what are we going to do to get to 12? And should there be some more controls that we're looking at? Or do we need to does Mark and the officers need to reassess either the current risk score, the target risk score, or both of them?
Nice one. And as well, it says estimated growth in Hertfordshire's population through to 2031. I'm not sure anybody would dare forecast population changes at the moment, given the huge changes that we have seen, both up and down, across the country. Fiona, are you able to advise on that one?
Yes, I think.
Not on the population, but on the mitigations.
Yes. Hopefully, I take Councillor Hale's points, and we will ask for a full review of that. There is, as you say, quite a big gap between the actual risk at the moment and the target risk. So to ensure that we have sufficient controls in there to try and bring it down, and how we are delivering against those controls as well. So thank you for highlighting that, and we will take that back to the risk owner.
Especially, Fiona, as I can see no actions being suggested as to how to bridge that gap.
No, okay.
Thank you. Again, I think we'd probably all quite like to get a copy of that when the information comes forward. Ian Ray, next. Ian.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, but I have, it's more of a general point, although I think there are some specific risks which it might relate to. There's a number of risks which are associated with the economic development, which may or may not happen because of COVID. There's talk we just discussed about population growth. and there's also risks to funding for infrastructure. But I wonder whether the funding risks for infrastructure have included, for example, the availability of fast broadband. I mean, it could well be that more people are working from home now, not only from the county council, but from other companies as well, in which people are not travelling to work, so they might be making less use of roads and rail transport, but making far more use of Teams or Zoom, and therefore the need for fast broadband across the county might be increased. I wonder whether there should be a review of the risks associated with not having a widespread fast broadband. I know there are some spots across the county where it's not available. I mean, there may even be some urban areas where it's not available. And the immediate risks which I can spot are SEO 6, SEO 8, SR 28, where they specifically mention growth, use of county council assets and such like. So I wonder whether it might be an idea to go through some of these risks to see whether lack of fast broadband or lack of universal fast broadband might be an issue that needs to be looked at.
I think Fiona's taken those on board. We'll keep that one hanging at the moment, because there's also the risk of the cyber attack on the county council's ICT, and it does seem that our reliance on ICT is absolutely massive at the moment. Tim Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, my question was just coming back to the new risk SE07 ENV0159, the climate crisis one again. I appreciate what Councillor Taylor said earlier, and the ownership of this needs to be, but it does cut across all areas of the county council, as we all know. I've recently been liaising with some officers in the property estates team about some unused plots of land. They've been unused for decades, and I mentioned biodiversity, sustainability, can they be used for something? And I got a sort of standard reply back saying they are reserved for purposes, but I know those plots of land, they haven't been used for the reserved purposes for decades, and I can imagine they won't be used for decades either. That's a specific case, but I'm just wondering how much of the climate crisis is actually embedded in officers' responses, embedded into the organisation itself, because it is an emergency we do need to tackle. It's rightly classed as high risk or 48, but from those responses I've received, I'm not too sure if the whole message is embedded throughout the organisation at the moment. That's
an interesting question, because it's now it has to be an item on every committee report, doesn't it? And the action plans that the various committees are moving forward on. I'm going to ask officers to update us where we are in terms of the implementation of the action plan. I don't think we're there yet, are we? Because it was a phased introduction.
Agreed. I think it's going to take a little while to filter through with all of the actions that are planned at the moment. But yes, I think they're all sort of starting now. So it might be worth the committee looking at a bit further on, perhaps in the autumn time.
If I could, Chair, just to try and help members that yes, we're all departments now. There is the overarching action plan that is now that has come forward, but is now going out obviously for wider consultation. I believe that will be taking place during the summer. And obviously we need to take into account current circumstances to ensure that we achieve the best sort of engagement that we could at this time. But in the meantime, all the departments are developing their own action plans in response to that strategy. And again, all of those will be available to be sort of checked, tested, and to see how we're progressing against this risk and this agenda by the Audit Committee, and I'm sure the Cabinet panels as well. So I would say that there is a lot of activity going on within the organisation. I completely agree with Councillor Williams that I think we still have work to do to really embed it in the DNA of the organisation, that we think about all those aspects without having to force the thinking in relation to that. There's many of these agendas that does take some time to embed within an organisation, but I would suggest that there is wide-ranging, we're calling it carbon literacy training that all the senior officers are going through at the moment to really understand all the things that this agenda involves, because it's very wide-ranging. And I certainly attended the course a month or so ago, and I learned a lot about it. And I may have moved from being illiterate to at least semi-literate in relation to the issues of the environment now. So absolutely accept there's still a lot more to do.
And interestingly, there was quite a lot of training on CO2 over the last month or 6 weeks that councillors have been invited to attend, and certainly I was on it at the beginning of March with 5 or 6 of my colleagues. So a huge amount of training is going on, and that's really helpful. I'm interested in the question and how much we're doing at the moment, and maybe that is one that committee should pick up for review in the autumn, when all of those action plans in place so far come to fruition, and also when there's been a consultation, because it's the sort of thing that you want to review all the time, but the outcome of the consultation and the big move forward, the autumn audit committee seems quite a sensible time for that one. Now, I haven't got any other hands up that I can see, so I'm going to suggest that we try to pull together the suggestion from Ian Ray about IT and broadband and cyber crime, which we haven't done for 3 or 4 years, because I don't think there's a risk specifically that covers, my goodness, how vulnerable we are, how incredibly reliant we are on IT. We always have been, we know we always have been, but the remote working from home, and I'm quite sure I wouldn't want anyone to quote this out of context, because I don't think we have specifically said what's going to happen after May, but there must be an increased reliance on working from home and the use of IT. So I'm going to suggest that we look at, and I'm just trying to turn the pages so I can find it right. For me, it's on Agenda Pack page 23, which I think is the public pack. The risk of successful cyber attack, and we pull in with that for high-speed broadband across the whole of the county, and the the reliance that we have on IT, and we do that as the big investigation in the next committee meeting, which I recall is in June.
Chairman, it would go to the July meeting.
Oh, that's interesting. At the moment, the order paper says June meeting. Could you just, the order paper says the next meeting is on the 14th of June. If I'm wrong, I apologise, but that's what it says. So let's worry about the date and let's look at, let's say the next meeting. We'll worry about the date later. So I've made a suggestion that Audit Committee goes ahead and looks at our incredible reliance on IT and all its branches. So the cyber attack, broadband, our reliance, etc.
Agreed. Agreed. I think it's a good idea.
Then there haven't been any other comments, and I'm now moving forward to the risk management report recommendations. So we're talking about the changes and the updates in the corporate and strategic risks since the last report to the committee be noted, that the risk management update report be noted, and then the last one is identifying the risk, and that the risk which comes to the next meeting of this committee cover everything in IT that I've referred to, but be loosely hinged on RE12, but goes considerably broader than that. Could we then, I'm looking, haven't seen any comments, could we then vote on that, please? Sorry, we can vote on all three together, I assume. And I'm looking in chat. which I think has just come up. And that looks as if it's going to be agreed, so I'll wait for officers to confirm. And meanwhile, I've turned to Agenda Pack 51, so that page 51, to turn us to item 3, which is the VISC focus report this time, which is on children's services referrals. And I believe we have Matt Ansell, the Operations Director of Children and Families, to take us through this. But before we do, right, we've just heard that item 2 was agreed. Thank you very much. So over to Matt Ansell, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I won't talk through the whole report. I'll just summarise it briefly, and then obviously happy to take any questions. So the purpose of this report was to highlight the risks associated with the pandemic and increased demand into children's services. And specifically, the report talks about a number of areas. It talks about contacts and referrals into the system, both in terms of our early help and children's social care, domestic abuse referrals, intentionally homeless, and also the impact on the pandemic and how that's impacted on our rise in children looked after numbers. And in terms of recommendation, the report asks the Audit Committee to note and comment upon the contents of the report, but also to in terms of the mitigation and controls that we have in place at the current time. If I talk through the report, section 5 talks about some of the national context in terms of what's happening around the country, so recognising that Hertfordshire aren't unique in this situation, all local authorities are experiencing the same challenges. And much of that is around hidden demand. What local authorities around the country are seeing in children's services is a reduction in referrals into statutory social work. And obviously, a lot of that is linked to the fact that schools have been closed to sort of many pupils other than pupils from a vulnerable cohort and those of key workers. In terms of children's services in Hertfordshire, the report highlights what we've been doing over the course of the last year in terms of controls and mitigations, increased support to families, increased monitoring to vulnerable children that are in the community during the course of the last year. In terms of thinking about the specific areas of risk and highlighted, in terms of referrals, an overall picture is we're around about 7% below the number of referrals that we would have experienced in the course of the last year, so the corresponding year previous to this year. The report, I think, provides that information. In terms of the most up-to-date figures, we collate figures on a week-by-week basis. So the last 2 or 3 weeks, in terms of figures, we're running at about 2.5% lower than what we would have experienced the previous year. So actually, contacts and referrals are sort of fairly up to the normal levels that we would have experienced, so that's positive. What we don't know is as schools start to sort of get back in after the Easter holidays, if we are then going to see a potential surge in demand. We looked at that previously, we looked at that and modelled that back in the summer when schools were planning to go back in September, and we didn't see that surge. And actually across the country, the majority of local authorities didn't see that surge. But what we're doing now is a very similar modelling scenario of looking at the number of referrals that we've received from colleagues in education, for example, which are much lower than what we'd normally expect, and sort of trying to anticipate what that hidden demand could be going forward. The report sort of talks about what the partnership have done around responding to an increase in domestic abuse referrals, both in terms of the services that are available in Hertfordshire and the online campaign and awareness raising. And then a couple of other areas it highlights in terms of the importance of our early help functions in Hertfordshire at the moment. We have seen an increased demand upon services in the early help system, which obviously benefits hugely families and stops them coming into statutory social work. And the other area of potential future demand is around homelessness and intentionally homelessness. We've developed a specific team within Children's Services working very closely with the district councils around homelessness and preventing homelessness for families. What we know from that work and working closely with colleagues in the councils, district councils, is that there is pent-up demand there, and so we're expecting to see an increase in that work. And we've mitigated that by developing that team and working very closely with our colleagues in the housing departments. The final area is around our children looked after numbers. So these are the children where we've had to bring into care. What we've seen is an increase in those numbers, and we saw quite a steady increase between July and December of last year. And we saw a reduction in children leaving the care system. And the analysis behind that has been that we haven't necessarily brought more children into care via safeguarding concerns, but actually some of those children have been older children where family stresses have caused breakdowns. Our really responsive adolescent services that we have in Hertfordshire would normally work really effectively with those families, hopefully stopping breakdowns, or if families do experience breakdowns, then working really intensively with the family and the children to return children home. Some of that work has been restricted because of having to work virtually. We're a relationship-based service, so having to provide those really intense interventions in a virtual way has been challenging. So we saw a reduction in the number of children leaving care and an increase in that sort of 15, 16 plus age range of children. That's now flatlined and steadied, and so the rate of children coming in is back to what we'd normally expect. And we've got a specific group looking at that, working at how we're going to sort of increase our responses to families to help bring that number back into line for what we would want it to be. So finally, in section 6, it talks through the work that we're doing in terms of modelling. I've touched upon that already in terms of future demand, in terms of how we've used the COVID-19 grant funding to develop some increased staffing in our service, and we've used that flexibly both across statutory social work but also in our early help system. So we've been able to move that increased staffing where we've needed it, and also around the demand reductions. So we put together a task and finish group which is represented from all parts of children's services, looking at specific ways of reducing that children looked after number, because that has risks in terms of for children, but also in terms of resource for and in terms of financial costs for children's services. So it's quite a quick run through, but hopefully that sort of outlines what the paper talks to, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. This is a huge report, and I haven't seen any hands up yet, but I'm sure I will have some. The two things that I am taking away is the surprise in the fact that we haven't had the upsurge that I'd anticipated as children went back to school as well. And I welcome your comments on that. And also the pressure on the older children, young people. Support when they leave care is huge, and I know we've done a lot of work on that in the past, but the increasing number of children, young people in the 16 plus age group, again, causes concern. I find your comments on mitigation, how we address or attempt to address these issues, really important. And I can see Sharon's hand is up, so Sharon Taylor first and then John Graham, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I found this report really, really interesting. So thank you, Matt, for your work on it. I have been very concerned about what was going on behind closed doors, and we've seen very significant spikes in domestic abuse in Stevenage. In fact, calls for help up 90% in our area, which is very worrying. We've heard a lot in recent days, Chair, about safer streets for women and children, and the same applies to homes. We want to make sure that people's homes are safe too. And the cost of dealing with this, I think, is yet to be seen. It will play out, I suspect, in the coming months and years in both the referrals we get, and I know the team have been under a lot of pressure in relation to domestic abuse, both at county and district level. In fact, we've had to increase our safe space accommodation from 2 units to 19 in Stevenage. So that's a significant increase. But my questions are really around the further pressures that may come, and it's referred to in the report because of you talk about further pressures on intentional homelessness and domestic violence, and we are facing, as we come to the end of the furlough and eviction bans, that seems to be a stress point that we need to be watching for. And I hope that we've got some plans in place to deal with that. And the other point I wanted to raise was at 530, where it talks about unaccompanied asylum seekers. It's just a question whether the dispersal, the Home Office dispersal plans for asylum seekers are going to put further pressure on our local services. We have taken a very high level of unaccompanied asylum seekers in Hertfordshire. And I think that's set, looking at what's happening at regional level, that's set to increase. Is there going to be a further risk in relation to that dispersal? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Matt, if you'd like to reply to those, please.
Yeah, of course. Taking them one by one. So in terms of the further pressures and intentionally homeless families, our prevention team are working really closely with the district councils and have identified a number of families that are potentially at risk or have been sitting during this pandemic that could be made homeless once the sort of support network has been lifted once we come out of the lockdown. So we are aware of families that are at risk of homelessness, and the whole point of the prevention team and working with the district council was to get in early and prevent those homelessness applications happening. So it is a potential area of demand and future risk, but we are working really closely with colleagues and housing departments to identify the families. So that's actually, there's a meeting I was at this morning, and that's a really positive piece of work that's been happening within the department. In terms of the dispersal scheme, we've got a really strong approach to that in the Eastern region. The hope with the national dispersal scheme is that actually what we'd see is a greater national dispersal, which could mean a less pressure placed on us, but it's really unclear at the moment. So again, it's something that we're really involved in, both at an Eastern region level and national level. Jenny Coles, our DCS, is heavily involved in that, trying to influence that. And so it's not completely clear at the moment in terms of the full impact of that, but I'm happy to update the committee as and when we're starting to get clearer data regarding that. But yes, it is a potential concern for us moving forward. And then the final points around demand and not seeing that at the moment is, as I say, we thought we'd seen a surge back in September, which we didn't. We've worked really closely with colleagues in education, and we'll continue to have discussions with them to talk about and identify children that they feel may be vulnerable and at risk, so we can try and provide early support to families as quickly as possible, because we know that if we can provide that early support, it's effective and cost effective and positive for families.
Thank you for that. And we've got 2 other people who'd like to comment. So John Graham first, and then John Hale, please.
Chairman, thank you. And then really mine is a comment. And Matt, thank you very much indeed for your explanation on this demand situation, and particularly the figures you've just given us on the school, because I was surprised to see that nationally that the number of referrals had declined. And I think we all felt maybe that is because the children aren't at school. But it's good that you've updated us 3 weeks into the schools. And yes, although we are seeing an increase in referrals, they're not the wave that we thought might be there. So I think that's very reassuring. My comment really comes from the benefit of sitting on the Children's Services panel, because 2 weeks ago we received the indicators, performance indicators for children's services up to the end of December. and really they were excellent. The high quality and standard that we expect is still there, and I think that's very applaudable given the pandemic and the restrictions on the way the services can be conducted. Because I'm sure in children's services there are some very delicate conversations to be had that are probably difficult on a face-to-face basis, but when you're having to work at a remote basis, they are probably even more difficult. And yet we saw the statistics coming out of children's services holding up to the level that we'd seen in previous years when we weren't constrained by the pandemic. So I think I'd just like to comment on, for me, how well children's services have performed during this pandemic period. Thank you.
Matt, did you want to comment on that? Or are you happy to go on to the next question?
I need to say thank you, and I will make sure that those comments are sort of taken back to the service, because I know the practitioners that have been delivering the service have been under huge pressure and have worked incredibly hard. So those comments will be really well received. So thank you.
Thank you. And then I've got John Hale, and then after John it will be Tim Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One area where there does seem to have been a slight increase in the number of children looked after is the 16 plus age group, where there does seem to be more of a marked increase. And I know there's been some concern about the availability of suitable placements for children overall. What's the risk around finding suitable placements for what I suspect is quite a difficult group to place anyway?
Matt?
So thank you. So our transformation programme was really aimed at looking at those sort of challenging, sort of slightly older children and making sure that we brought them back into county. So it's a piece of work that we'd identified through our transformation programme already. Yes, without doubt, the pressure on the system, both in terms of our own foster care placements and the sort of independent market is significant. And we do have some real challenges to find suitable local placements for children, especially of the older age That's why we invested and developed our specialist adolescent services, that's known as SASH within Hertfordshire, to really work with families to try and keep children at home, because we believe that's, unless there's a significant safeguarding reason, that's where they should be. And so, yeah, without doubt, there are risks in terms of placement availability. But what we hope is, as we're starting to move out of the pandemic, that we can really start to provide those interventions that we know are successful from our previous work to keep those sort of older children where there's been family breakdown, where they may be involved in sort of wider exploitation issues in the community, and we can support them to remain at home and provide that support within the family, because we believe that's more effective for both children, young people, and in terms of the sort of the wider issues around placement availability.
John, thank you for picking up certainly the area of my concern, which is the impact on the older children, young people as well. Right, Tim Williams next, and then after that, William Wyatt-Lowe.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I was also going to pick up the sort of the lack of this sort of children's referral surge that hasn't come through as a lot of us were predicted, including myself. I appreciate when schools reopen, sort of thing. I had heard from a teacher that were queues outside the council in student welfare offices. I've heard from Watford Women's Centre about domestic abuse, marriage breakdowns, and the sort of homelessness situation, and was expecting this surge to come out when the schools return. So it's good to see that's not there. But yeah, I can imagine a lot of it's down to, hopefully, that the schools themselves with their counselling services have tackled a lot of it and sort of done it. They've been well prepared for it and they've got this service there. I'd like to also think, basically, the resilience of the pupils themselves, the children, I think is probably is a good one as well. They all were looking forward to getting back to school, and perhaps that sort of lessened some of the needs as well. So it's more of a general comment that it's good to see the surge hasn't come through, but at the same time, I do believe we just need to be careful at the same time.
Thank you for that. Then straight on to William Wyatt-Lowe.
Thank you. My question's about the court system. You mention it in 533, and my question is simply, is the court system creating a backlog for us now? Is it getting better? Because we've certainly heard some horrible stories about some parts of the legal system. Does this apply to the Families Court?
Matt, I think that definitely merits a reply, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for the question. So, yeah, I mean, certainly in the initial months of the lockdown, the pandemic, there was a significant challenge for us. I'm really pleased to be able to report that actually that has changed quite significantly in the last 2 months, certainly. The head of legal, Simon Banks, and myself have been meeting with our lead judge in Watford regularly throughout the pandemic. There's been a significant commitment from the judges to try and make sure that they heard cases whilst balancing human rights and making sure that where there was significant contested final hearings, that parents were going to be able to have the right access, the right support, and have their case properly heard. But certainly, in terms of the backlog now has been almost cleared. We're back to sort of the performance figures around timeframes and timescales of care proceedings that we were pre-pandemic. And so it's a really positive picture that actually the courts in Watford and the system that sits around it have really been able to move work forward, whereas lots of parts of the country haven't yet. So I think we've got a really positive picture actually in Hertfordshire now.
So thank you, colleagues, for your really good questions. Matt, thank you very much indeed for the report. It is fascinating that the moving picture that we had perhaps anticipated isn't moving quite the direction that we went into, which shows how very important it is that we keep on top of the huge variation and changes that are coming forward as a consequence of COVID. It's so new and so different, and no, we couldn't, and we haven't predicted everything accurately because things are so different. But thank you very much indeed, and I'm confident you've heard enough from that for us then to move to the recommendation, which is that we are invited to note, comment on and endorse the overall approach that the County Council is taking to mitigate the risk and associated controls relating to children's services demand in the coming months. I can see, Tim, your hand is still up. I'm assuming it's a legacy hand and that we can go ahead and vote.
Legacy hand.
Thanks. If we could then vote on item 3, please. And while we're doing that, and my chat hasn't come up yet, but while we're voting, I'm sure members and anybody listening in will move to Agenda Pack 6, page 65, because we're going to move to agenda item number 4, the SIAS Internal Audit Progress Report. And for what it's worth, I still haven't got chat up on my screen, so I haven't been able to vote. Officers, can you advise me, please? Is everybody having problems, or is it just me?
I can see the chat function. I can see people are putting agreed into the chat function, Chair.
Well, thank you very much indeed for telling me that. My chat function seems to be caught in a nice little spiral, and I'm coming in and out of it, and it's not doing anything. Perhaps, officers, you will record that I am voting in favour. And because I can't see the chat function, somebody's going to have to tell me when that has been agreed, please.
There's a chat saying item 3 agreed from Teresa.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm not quite sure where my chat's gone, but I'm sure somebody will be trying to sort it out. And it's interesting, I can't see myself on the screen either, but that might be a blessing in reply, a blessing in hiding. Right. So let us now move on to item 4, Hertfordshire County Council's SIAS Shared Internal Audit Service Progress Report. Over to Darren Williams.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm the head of the Shared Internal Audit Service, and I oversee delivery of the Council's audit plan. I won't go through the report in huge detail, but I'll just bring out a couple of highlights just to make the committee aware of certain key things in the report. So if I draw your attention to page 75, paragraph 211, that just highlights the in-year changes that we've had to do to the audit plan. Obviously, as members of the committee will be aware, it's been a year where we've had to I suppose, be a bit flexible about the timing of audits and changing environment. So we've got 10 audits that we've taken out the plan, but it's really just to give the committee assurance that for 8 of those, they are definitely going to be done. It's just more about the timing. So they've gone into the 21-22 plan, which you will see as the next item. And we've in effect used those days to do different activities, which are also reflected within that paragraph. Moving on to page 78, paragraph 220. This is just really a summary of the school's high priority recommendations. So as the committee members will be aware, we don't follow up the school's high priority recommendations in our quarterly follow-up cycle. Instead, we do that as a separate exercise once a year. That's primarily due to the volume of recommendations. But it's really just to highlight to the committee that you've had a separate report that gave the outcomes of that review. Within that report, we highlighted that there were 3 schools and 6 recommendations where we didn't get an update from those individual schools. It's really just to confirm to the committee that we followed those up, and we now do have responses to all 6 of those recommendations, 5 of which have been implemented and 1 of which has got a revised implementation date, which we will follow up again with the school in the autumn term. Moving on to page 79, paragraph 2.23, which is the medium priority recommendations. It's really just to highlight to the committee, obviously Appendix C of this report gives the updates on those that are over 12 months overdue. That is beginning to creep up a little. So I think in discussions during the briefings, we're going to re-look at the process that we currently use in relation to chasing up those over 12 months old, and probably revert it more to following those ones up at the point they become due, or any revised dates become due, rather than leaving it until the standard follow-up process. We're also going to build in extra elements around basically improving the awareness of boards of those that are outstanding. It'll probably be on a quarterly basis just to give them an update of the status of all their outstanding recommendations. And also where action owners seek to change the date beyond that that's stated in, for example, this particular report, we will ask them to give a written update, which will be CC'd to their assistant director, just in terms of primarily why they're needing to change the date again, given it's 12 months overdue, the reasons, and probably more importantly, and probably important for the committee, is more how they're actually managing any risks in relation to the delays in implementing that recommendation. I think for the committee, that's one of the key aspects, really. If you can't implement that recommendation, if there's been delays, well, obviously the recommendation was made to manage a risk. How are you managing that risk in between? We'll look at the process we follow in relation to those updates, whether we provide the committee with that information in between committee meetings. But we will make the officers aware that the committee may wish to invite them in if they're not satisfied with the update that's been given, or they want further information. So we'll have a look at that. Obviously, we need to refine the process out a bit more, but certainly, I think to give the committee that assurance that basically officers are implementing the recommendations and managing the risks in an appropriate way, I think we do need to beef up that process a bit more. So we'll certainly be looking at that. On page 81. Paragraph 2.28. This is where we provide the performance management information, so how we're doing against the PIs that was set at the start of the year. Probably one of interest is the planned projects. So we've reported 62% against a target 66%. Appreciate we're in March, so that may look a little bit low in terms of performance. I can advise the committee that that figure has now increased to 66%. And by the end of the, well, probably in the next day or so, it will go up further to 72%. This is really primarily based on the fact that the schools plan got shifted to Q4. There are a high volume of schools reviews. I think we've got about 30 school visits taking place. So the figure obviously increases as each of those are completed. But it's probably also worth just pointing out that in terms of the PI, I mean, it is a PI figure, but what it's leading to really is us being able to provide an annual assurance opinion. That goes to the committee in July. So any audits that we don't manage to complete by the 31st of March, that doesn't really necessarily automatically impact on our opinion. We will make sure that those are done as a priority in April, so that they're completed in advance of us needing to write that opinion. Currently, we're confident that we will have enough assurance available to provide a robust opinion. but obviously we'll continue to monitor that. And the only other bit of or content of the report that's probably useful for the committee to note is on page 82, paragraph 2.32, which is just advising the committee of changes to the internal audit assurance opinions for 21-22. That's basically following SIPFA guidance that was issued in April 2020, really with the intent of setting a more common set of definitions across local authorities, across the public sector, basically so that it's easier to benchmark, so that people who sit on, say, a council audit committee and maybe a health audit committee actually can get a clearer kind of benchmark as to the differences of systems between the two authorities, because they'll be using the same rating. In terms of what it means for the council, currently we use a 4-tier rating. This will still be a 4-tier rating, but we just changed the use of good and satisfactory and replaced that with definitions of substantial and reasonable. But I will say that the wording that goes against each of those definitions has been slightly tweaked to align to the SIPFA guidance. And that's the updates I'd like to provide, and really invite any questions from the committee.
And I can see that, thank you very much, Darren. And I can see that our officer, Scott Crudgington, has put his hand up, as has John Wiley and Simon Bloxham. So a very interesting report. Again, the impact of COVID on you and your team has been substantial. Right, so Scott Crudgington, our very senior officer first, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to pick up the point that that Darren made around paragraph 2.24, which was highlighting the issues relating to recommendations that have not yet been implemented beyond their agreed delivery date. Okay, without getting into all the technical language, but one of my responsibilities as something called a Section 151 officer is to be your accountable officer, to make sure that we have good systems of control and governance here at the County Council in looking after taxpayers' money. And in general terms, obviously, I'm pleased to report that's all in hand. But in relation to making sure that we have a good control system in place and making sure the recommendations that my audit team are undertaking, and we find still that we've got recommendations, no matter, even with officer encouragement, reminders, or whatever the case may be, now nearing nearly 2 years after the promise of their implementation, I personally find unacceptable. Now, from that perspective, I'm doing work behind the scenes now to really pull that closer to my officers to make sure that we get more traction on these. I take a view that either our officers that these recommendations relate to can either believe that that the recommendation is no longer valid. If that is the case, they should explain why. If they believe that the recommendation can be mitigated in a different way, again, they should explain why. If they're relying on a piece of technology to be implemented, so there's a dependency, then again, we should understand that, and then we would adjust the time frame accordingly when they can implement their recommendation. So it would be my recommendation to this committee as well, the backing of myself working with this committee to really get these outstanding recommendations tidied up or addressed. It's one or the other. Either the management accept the risks that are attached to the recommendation that's been made, or alternatively to implement the changes that have been proposed. I'm happy either way, but I would like to see this list reduced over the next few months. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much for that. You will know, officers, that we've been working on a recommendation, which I'll come to at the end, which will enable officers to exactly do what they're talking about. The objective of the Audit Committee is to help improve at all times the performance of Hertfordshire County Council, and internal audit is a key player in that. And we have come so far in the last, well, the term of this council, in hugely ramping up the support that internal audit has had in reviewing, and we have called people in the past to review what they're doing. So thank you, Scott. I will come to my recommendation in due course, because I've got a list of people who want to speak. I've got John Wiley, and then Simon Bloxham, and then Sharon Taylor, and then Ian Ray, and then Tim Williams. So, John, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Darren, for an interesting report. With regards to 2.24, which is the revised target dates, who actually sets the revised target dates? Because if I was to set a date for myself and then decide that I'm unable to do it, I couldn't then just change the date without actually getting permission from somebody higher up. So who sets the target dates? How does it get authorised? And you did mention internal risk management. What sort of risk management is done to make sure that nothing is actually falling through? Because it may be something that's important. If I, as an officer, decide that I haven't got time for whatever reason to do it, and I change it, there may be knock-on implications for that I may not understand. And surely there must be some sort of risk management that says, well, you can't actually delay it, or if you do delay it, something else will happen. So 3 sort of questions, all sort of wrapped up in one.
Okay, thank you for those. So in terms of the target dates, so obviously based on the volume that we have to follow up, which is in excess of 60, 70, 80 recommendations, currently it works on the officer providing a revised target date if they believe they can't implement the recommendation by the date they've set. It doesn't actually require any alternative authorisation at the moment, so it wouldn't be authorised by their assistant director or director. We're relying on the officer to make that judgment. Obviously, we can relook at that element of the process because maybe that is a bit weak in terms of how it currently sits. In terms of any risks, we did have a process slightly derailed through COVID where we used to go to the boards each quarter, so they would get full awareness of all of the recommendations that were outstanding within their service, and they would have obviously the opportunity to monitor those. And if they felt that perhaps the officer was not understanding the risk, they would obviously then have the opportunity to discuss that with the officer. That unfortunately hasn't happened as consistently during the period of COVID, but it's certainly something we're looking to put back in place for 21-22.
Thank you. If I can come back quickly, Chairman, I do think we do need to look at this authorising. It does seem to me that we could be marking our own homework, which really isn't the best way of doing something. So I think if someone is going to postpone or revise, I think it does have to be authorised by someone higher up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Simon Bloxham.
Thank you, Chair. The questions that I wanted to ask, really, hang on, that's a bit better. The questions I wanted to ask, John's just really covered those, but Darren, it really made me think about another one to do with this that I hadn't thought of in the first place. I think there's something gone drastically wrong if the officer has to go, yeah, I'm not going to make that recommendation. I'm going to give it an extra 6 months to 2 years in some cases. Is that what I'm reading right? I might have that wrong, but to me, something in our planning and our target setting initially is therefore wrong if they can't make it. Because I can understand that the officer involved would make that recommendation for, well, we want that recommendation extended, that target date, but we must have got it drastically wrong in the first, because I know it's only a one-off, but the 24-month one, we got to have had that majorly wrong in the first place, haven't we? I mean, is there anything that we should be looking at there to try and correct that?
I'm just going to step in there because there is an attachment to this which sets out the progress reports which the officers have been following up. And there are often a variety of reasons given, which I don't question, but it's the tightening up of them. You know, when your in tray is so big, something cannot quite get to the top. What we have to make sure is that our issues get to the top. But over to Darren to give you a formal officer response, because I'm not familiar with all the nuances within the appendices to this report.
Thank you. So obviously the process as it works is that the officer will provide a response to the draft audit report, where they'll put in the actions they're proposing and the timelines for that. Obviously, as they're more, as we say, expert in those particular systems, whilst we will look over the timescales, and if they look totally unreasonable, we will go back to them and just say, well, look, I think you're trying to do that in too short a timescale. Perhaps you haven't considered this and this. We do have to rely on their judgment. I do think there may still be an issue that they think they maybe need to implement them in a faster timescale than they do. At the end of the day, they need to implement them in the timescale that's required to get it right. And I think maybe there's probably a bit of work for us to have that discussion with officers when they're setting their action plans, just to make sure they're being realistic in terms of timescales. But I think, as the chair said, you know, the updates provided in Appendix C often do also kind of highlight where things have perhaps been, you know, not gone along the same line that they originally planned. Maybe they haven't thought about how long it would take to get something authorised. Maybe there's been an issue with perhaps delays in implementing a system, which may be outside of their control. I think, you know, obviously the purpose of Appendix C is to give you their views really as to why it's been delayed. But yeah, there's certainly something about us challenging those timescales where we think they are unreasonable, but we are reliant on the officer expertise.
Okay, thank you. Shall we move on now to Sharon, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to comment on the limited assurance report on information control, if that's okay, at 3.3.
Absolutely.
I've looked at the progress report, and I note that it's due for for a report to come back to the SMB on the 31st of March. First of all, I hope that what's happening on that can be reported back to our next committee. But I'd want to see a stronger recommendation around central oversight and ownership by senior management of this information control issue. And in view of our history at HCC, where failures in information control have resulted in substantial fines from the Information Commissioner, I think this issue is really, really important. We can't underestimate the potential for financial loss, and that's what this committee is about, really, of having a failure of information control. So I hope. I see there's a progress plan there. I hope it does. It's taken with due seriousness that will mean it is reported back by its due date of the 31st of March. And I think we should know at the next meeting of this committee that that has happened. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Sharon, as a member of this committee, you and all members receive copies of all of these reports, and this particular one came through about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I know I was in communication with our officer Darren Williams about this. I'm sure you will have spotted it as well, but you're quite right. Information is vital, and it is where we have to make sure that performance is tightly controlled. So thank you very much for that. Ian Ray and Tim Williams, then Tim.
Thank you. Yes, I want to make a sort of general comment, really. I mean, there's been some discussion about the poor performance against the recommendations and the dates at which they should have been achieved by. There's been no specific point made about how COVID might have impacted on that failure to achieve recommendations on time. But I wonder, is there a general, would like an officer's view on whether or not working from home, for example, may have had an impact on implementing some of these recommendations? And if so, is that something we might want to put forward under the next item as for in terms of a future work plan, whether an investigation by internal audit of the effectiveness of working from home and how that might have impacted on the performance of various departments? I wonder whether perhaps an officer would like to comment on that.
Oh, nice question. Darren.
No, that's certainly an interesting question, and I think it's one of the things. I can't remember where we've put it in the first 6 months. It may be in the horizon scanning for the second 6 months, but certainly looking at ways of working, as that's a major project that the council is undertaking, would be certainly something that we'd look to look at and obviously assess any impacts that may have had, which may well be positive impacts, as well as kind of any things that continue to need to be looked at. I don't think I've particularly spotted anything in Appendix C in terms of the officer updates that actually suggested those were barriers. There were some issues. I think in one case one of the actions relied on use of volunteers, and that's been more difficult to achieve, as obviously volunteers either were not available or were obviously focusing on other activities to support the COVID response. But certainly, yeah, it's an area that we're definitely interested in because it's a major project for the council. So it's certainly something that we would look to look at in more detail as part of the audit plan.
Thanks very much. And Tim Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to ask questions on paragraph 2.28 and the graph there on page 81. Again, it's against the actual performance for basically all the reports received by SIAS. I know you've highlighted they'll be going up in the next week or two. I was just wondering about sort of team capacity. Is there enough team capacity in SIAS to do these? Is there enough team capacity within Hertfordshire County Council to actually come back to SIAS with all their recommendations and priorities and risk factors? And of course, it is appreciated. You have to recognise the COVID year that we've been through. There's no doubts on that. And particular areas throughout the council have been totally pushed on this: adult care services, children's services and things like that. But I'm just questioning about the capacity to respond to these requests.
Tim, can I just ask you to tell me again where you're referring? I've got the agenda page 81 and I haven't got a graph on it.
OK, it's not a graph, it's a table.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I missed.
Paragraph 2.28, the table there highlighting 63% and things like that. A little bit low, but as explained by Darren, there are reasons behind that. Yeah.
Thanks. Darren, did you want to comment?
OK, just trying to think of the best way to answer that question, really. In terms of SIAS resources, we've got sufficient resources to deliver the plan as it's sat. I think what we've tried to do is work very closely with the organisation. I think some of it, audits may have been delayed either because they link to a transformation piece of activity or a project, and that project has been delayed as a result of COVID. In other cases, it's going to be access to the right officers in order to get the best value out of the review. Certainly, there would have been some reviews that we could have undertaken, but obviously we're keen to make sure we get the best outcome out of that review in terms of being able to speak to the right people to do a robust assessment. So any that have tended to involve frontline teams, obviously they will be more difficult to do in the current environment because the frontline teams are obviously focusing on the COVID response or trying to return to business as usual. So is it a lack of capacity? It may be a lack of capacity where obviously officers have been diverted to other activities. But I think, all we can really do as an audit service is to work with directors, with boards, and to get their view as to the feasibility of doing an audit. What I would say is we're not obviously counselling any audits. We're just pushing them forward to a time where we can get the best value out of them and we can make sure that we can obviously undertake the work that's required in order to provide a robust opinion.
OK, well, look, thank you very much indeed.
Could I just do a quick follow up, if that's OK?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Again, I'm sure you talk to other sort of authorities. Where does it sort of fit in with, if we benchmark to other authorities where they are with their planned works and responses?
Sure. So I think what we've tried to do, so you will find some authorities that have basically got audit departments who have not done a single audit this year. And that's either because they were just unable to get the traction to do them. I think the important thing for us was what we tried to do was flex what we were doing in order to align it to what the key risks actually were at this time. So obviously, as you'll see from the progress report, we've got a whole plan of COVID activities, and those were predominantly easier to work with the organisation on because they were activities that were going on, and therefore we were looking to do more real-time assurance on those. So I think, there's some authorities who have managed to deliver maybe 70% of their audit plan, 80%, but I'd probably struggle to find any authority that's managed to deliver their original plan in its entirety. I think in all cases the plans needed to be adjusted, and obviously, some authorities would have difficulty in kind of delivering what they'd originally set out to do. I think the challenge for audit, especially in terms of trying to arrive at our annual opinion, which is the key thing that we're undertaking the work to be able to do at the end of the year, it's about us being flexible in terms of what we're using to provide that. And we're certainly looking outside of just audits to basically look at other assurance available so we can get a rounded view where perhaps we weren't able to do particular things that we'd originally anticipated to do.
OK, so thank you very much for that. So I think we now move to the recommendations, but I wanted to say a couple of things. I do have an extra recommendation. I think in terms of the minutes, I'm confident the minutes will pick up what Darren Williams has described and what Scott Crodgington has described, how you are between you going to ensure that there is a better bit of control on the target dates and how they're managed, and making sure that the various risk committees for each service area, I think they're called boards, I don't know, will review and take responsibility for medium-term priorities that are not at the moment achieving the target date. So this is all to keep the whole thrust of Hertfordshire County Council moving towards improving performance, getting better value, getting sharper outcomes on time, minimising the risk for the County Council. But if we then look at the recommendations, so I won't have a recommendation on that, but if we look at the recommendations, we've got, the first one is note the internal audit progress report, then B, note the one new limited assurance opinion and high priority recommendation included, and Sharon has drawn attention to that, thank you. Then note the progress update on the implementation status of the outstanding high priority recommendations and medium priority recommendations outstanding over 12 months. I would like to put another recommendation in there, and I've played around with the wording. I think I've been in communication with officers, so I'm going to read it out quite slowly and pause and see if people are happy. The thrust of this is to make absolutely sure that the officer responsible for managing the risk in terms of the medium-term recommendation knows that he, she will be called to this committee if they don't send a strong report and achieve the dates that they have set out. So this is the recommendation. Note with concern the number of outstanding medium priority recommendations, particularly those over 12 months, and we require the responsible officers each to submit a written account to the audit committee on the position of their revised targets, brackets including full details of any ongoing impediments. And I put that in there in case there's a genuine IT problem, a piece of software, or somewhere else within the service department that is holding them up. So I'm going back, including full details of any ongoing impediments, with the expectation of being called to the next meeting of this committee in the event that recommendations have not been implemented by the target dates. So I'm proposing that as a new D, and that shuffles D down to E, the proposed changes of the assurance opinions and definitions, and then E shuffles down to F, approve the proposed in-year amendments to the 2021 audit plan. So are you happy with that? Nobody's saying anything, no hands are coming up. With that new recommendation D, and which moves the other two down, can we then please vote? My chat function's frozen again. I couldn't have it on chat because I needed to see who was voting, and you need to do that with who's present. So I have had to come out of chat, and now going back in, it doesn't want me to. Is everybody else able to see chat?
Yes, I can see the chat.
Okay, so it's just me. So it won't surprise you to know that I'm agreeing it. And I hope everybody else is as well. And while we're waiting for that to come through, and somebody's going to have to tell me if it's coming through, we're going to move on to item 5, which is, something's just popped up. We're going to move on to item 5 while that's coming through, which is on page 107 of the pack. And it looks as if, lovely, I can see chat again. It looks like everybody agreed. Good. So if we then turn to page 107, which of course I didn't do, so I'm just doing it now. Item 5, it's Darren again, the internal audit plan for the first half year, because we're not able to do a full year at the moment because of the huge flexibilities that COVID is forcing on us. Darren.
Thank you, Chair. So I didn't really want to say too much because I suppose at the end of the day it's all contained within the report, and it is basically the audit plan for the first 6 months. It is worth highlighting that the process we're looking to adopt with this is what's presented to you today is a plan for the period April till the end of September. We plan to re-engage with service boards in probably late July, August, in order to re-look at the items in Appendix, probably B, I think it is, which I'm just trying to work out which page that's on. That'll be on pages 127 to 130. Those are the areas that we've identified during this initial horizon scanning round that we may consider for inclusion in the second 6 months. But obviously the whole point of having a second 6 month plan is that we can relook at the whole environment, the whole risk environment of the council, and obviously relook at what's the most appropriate risk to be looking at in the second 6 months. I will highlight to the committee that the one thing this report doesn't do, and it's an oversight on my part, is it doesn't reflect that the audit plan for this year has reduced by, I think it was about 146 days from last year's audit plan. That was with discussions with Section 151 Officer Scott. Basically, really just to look at what we actually need in terms of the number of days to deliver robust assurance. There's no set number of days for an audit plan, so it's really us agreeing with the Section 151 officer what's the most appropriate number of days, and we're satisfied that with a revised plan of, I think it's 1,317 days, that we've got sufficient days in there to deliver a robust set of work to provide that end of year opinion. The only other comments I'd make is on page 117, paragraph 3.3. That just provides the performance indicators. Those will remain as they currently are, so that we achieve basically 95% of the planned days, 95% of the planned projects. But I will just draw the committee's attention to the customer satisfaction indicator following the March SIAS board meeting, and that's the partnership board, because obviously we work as a shared service. We've agreed that we'll have a re-look at the customer satisfaction indicator in year, just basically to see where we can improve the level of response to the customer satisfaction questionnaires that we send out, because obviously that's the whole point of that really is to lever out kind of comments or observations as to help us develop the service in the future. And then finally, you've got Appendix A, which is the plan for April to September, and Appendix B, as we've said, which is the areas that we'll take forward for further discussion with boards in July or August. That's all I really wanted to say on the report, and open up for any questions.
I haven't seen any hands coming up. I'm going to, John Hale has put his hand up. I'm just going to make one comment. I'm going to make a second recommendation as well, because each time I look at this, I know we always talk about the internal audit plan cross-referencing to the risk register, because it is appropriate that when we look at topics for internal audit, that they should reflect the ones where we believe that there's a high level of risk. So I'm going to propose a second recommendation, in addition to the one already there, that in future the internal audit plan be cross-referenced to the risk register. I believe there's been a very tight link in the past, but if you can visibly do it for us so we can spot it, that would be helpful. So with that, which I'll pop on the table now, John Hale. John.
Thank you, Chair. And I thoroughly agree with your suggested extra recommendation, because that partly ties in what I was going to ask too. Is I don't know what the last time that the internal audit function looked at the whole risk management process. And if it is perhaps time we should be looking at that process to make sure that we are adequately identifying and assessing the risks that face the council.
It ties in quite well, doesn't it? Great minds and all that.
I certainly believe we have done an audit on risk management. It would probably be a couple of years back now, so probably wouldn't hurt to look at it again. But I think it came out with a reasonably good opinion when we did it. I'd obviously have to look back and see what the outcome was, but it is certainly something we've looked at. I will say, in terms of the audit plan, when we're setting it, or I suppose doing the planning for discussions with boards, one of the key things we look at is a risk register, and we will go through that from start to finish, as well as other aspects such as committee minutes. We'll look at the external horizon as well to pick up risks that maybe we may not have identified as an authority, changes in legislation, etc. But certainly I agree that it would be beneficial to demonstrate more clearly that we've done that within the plan, and obviously that the things we've included do actually link to key risks of the authority.
Thanks for that. And I can see Sharon Taylor's got her hand up. So Sharon first, and then I suspect Fiona's going to throw some light onto this. Fiona Timms. So Sharon first.
Yeah, I agree with your additional recommendation, Chair, and with John's comments. And I think that's because, although it may have only been done a couple of years ago, of course, the world's moved on with COVID and so on. And I think looking at how we assess risk across the board would be useful to do again. And I do hope that, I'm sure it does, but as we come to the end of this session of council, Chair, I think taking into account the very detailed attention this committee has given, including the focus reports that we've had, which I found very helpful, and the close monitoring of long outstanding audit reports, which we've referred to under previous items, I think has been a big step forward. And I hope that as you review the risk management and how that works through into audit and cross-reference it, that the role of this committee in making sure those links are made will be taken very clearly into consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those comments, Sharon. Now, Fiona Timms, were you able to make a comment on when the risk register was reviewed via internal audit?
Yes, it was certainly done, as Darren said. It was a couple of years ago. I'm just trying to see the exact date, but I know it was undertaken by our partner auditor team, because obviously we're part of assurance services. So it was undertaken by BDO when it was done, so that there was some, there was no conflict of interest there. So it was externally done by BDO at that time. But I'm just looking for the date.
Thank you. That's reassuring. So let us move immediately to the chat, and let me try and do that and hope that it comes up more quickly. We've got recommendation 4, which has now become 4.1 on the order paper, to approve, and then 4.2, that in future the internal audit plan be cross-referenced to the risk register. And by that I mean visibly cross-referenced, as opposed to we know it's all happening, but let's be able to see it. So vote please. And note, my chat's messing about again, I'm afraid. I haven't got anything through yet. I still can't see my chat, so please will you record that I am voting in favour. And while we're waiting for that to come through, let us then look at item 6, which I think is on the pack page number 131, and it's the anti-fraud plan 2021 and the anti-fraud plan for 2021 to 2022. That's not easy to say, is it? Page 131. But before we start, I'm just going to ask the officers. I can't see a thing on chat, so have we got an agreement on item 5?
Item 5 agreed, Chairman, including the additional recommendation.
And the minute you spoke, it popped up. Thank you very much. Right. And now I can't get back to the other one. Oh, goodness gracious me. The joys of IT. There we go. So we're asking Nick Jennings, please, to present the Shared Anti-Fraud Service Progress Report. Nick.
Good afternoon. Oh, good morning still, Chair members. Yeah, I'm Nick Jennings. I work for the Shared Anti-Fraud Service.
Nick, we can't see your screen. Would you like to pop your screen on?
Sorry, Chair. I do apologise.
Right. It's quite nice to see people when they're talking.
Can you see me now, Chair?
I can. Oh, no, I can see William Wyatt Lowe splendidly. Nick, hello there. Thank you.
I can see Nick.
Fantastic.
Now.
Some people really wouldn't want that, but there we go. I'll expose you all to it. Right, Chair, thank you very much. Yes, this is our report today. You're actually getting 2 reports for the price of 1. You're asked to approve the council's anti-fraud plan, as you say, for 21-22. And secondly, to note the work undertaken by the council officers and the shared anti-fraud service in protecting the council against the risk of fraud and corruption in the current financial year. Just brief background for anybody listening. SAFS provides a variety of functions for the council, from developing policies and processes to deter fraud, delivering fraud awareness training for staff and members, promoting the use of data and data analytics to prevent and identify fraud quickly, and issuing public and internal communications to deter fraud. And then finally, we undertake investigations and the prosecution of fraud and recovery of monies where our other defences have failed us. So on top of that, we also develop an anti-fraud plan with officers for each year, and members can find the proposed plan for 21-22 at page 139 of your bundles. The plan for next year takes into account the latest best practice, guidance and recommendations from organisations such as National Audit Office, the Ministry of Housing, Communities, Local Government, SIPFA and other professional organisation and bodies. The plan this year, just briefly, I'm not going to go through the report in a great deal of detail, but just to let you know, the plan for this year includes a fighting fraud and corruption locally checklist from the national strategy that was produced in 2020. Members can find this at Appendix A, page 145 of your bundles. The strategy in 2020 was delivered as a partnership between the Local Government Association, Solace, SIPFA, CFAS, external audit companies and practitioners from across the sector, and it really does take into account the latest best practice. What we want to do with the checklist is to allow us to see how well the council is doing in meeting the counter-fraud standards laid out in the strategy. We continue to see a focus on acknowledge, prevent, pursue, and from 2020 we've added 2 additional themes around governance and protect. So governance is quite new, and it does look at what as an organisation we do to ensure that we have the right policies, processes, resources in place, and protect is an overall strand of protecting the authority and also protecting the service users that we work with. So we will be reporting back to this committee and senior officers during the year. It's also likely that the chair of this committee will have a role in ensuring that the council has the right levels of assurance, resources, skills and the knowledge to protect itself against fraud. And Appendix B on page 149 details the officers and members that may have a particular role in delivering the plan for this year. As a public document, we always keep the anti-fraud plan brief, so as not to give away too much of the work the council will be doing, but we will be providing this committee with updates on actual work undertaken during the year to come. And Appendix C on page 151, we've included the KPIs for the shared anti-fraud service that have been agreed for the current year. It's very similar to previous years, very much about business activity. So, Chair, I commend the plan to you. Just touching briefly on the second part of my report, which starts at page 136. We do talk briefly about the levels of reported fraud and outcomes from some of that work this year. But also just like to bring to the committee's attention the fact the council has been successful and complied with the requirements of the Cabinet Office National Anti-Fraud Initiative from October 2020. That's a massive upload of data that happens across the whole country between October and February of this year. And we're now working closely with officers to resolve the output and reporting from that activity. We've just received that, came through to us the end of February. We're working on that data at the moment with officers, and we hope to have that fully resolved by the summer. Chair, that's my report at this point. I'm more than happy to take any questions from members.
I can't see any hands coming up, and I think we all deplore fraud because it is theft. It is theft from the taxpayer. It has been a disgrace that some people during these really difficult COVID times have seen it as an opportunity to increase and perpetuate new frauds or more of the old ones, and we deplore that. So Nick, keep going. Thank you very much indeed, and a nice report. So with no hands going up, can I invite members to vote on the recommendation, please? We approve the anti-fraud plan for 2021-22, and we note the activity to protect the council against fraud and corruption in 2021.
Thank you very much, Chair.
I can see it. Good. And while people are voting, I'm going to invite us to move on to item 7, which is on page 153 of the pack, and at the same time to say to colleagues that in 15 minutes we will be, well, it's 7:45 now, we will be at midday at 12 noon, and at that stage we will have our 1-minute silence. Irrespective of who is speaking, we will have a 1-minute silence, and we will keep going, and we will have a break after that as appropriate. But we won't have the break before. We will be here for the 1-minute silence, and I'm sure colleagues will remain at their screens and at their desk for that 1 minute. So on to, have we got agreement that was agreed? Item 6.
Item 6 agreed, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right, so if we move to item 7, the report of the County Council Audit Committee for, well, I was going to say the current year, the year we're just coming to an end of. Colleagues, this is your report. So Chris Wood, would you like to introduce it, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm Chris Wood, the Head of Assurance at HCC. And as the Chairman has said, this is your report. It's the annual report of the HCC Audit Committee for the period 1 April 2020 to 31st of March 2021. It's for members of the committee to note prior to its submission to the County Council. It also summarises the work of the Audit Committee for the year and reflects on the effectiveness of the Audit Committee in discharging its responsibilities. The production of the report is recommended practice by CIPFA. So after that brief introduction, might I invite any questions or comments?
John Graham. John.
Chairman, thank you, and thank you for the report, which I think is very comprehensive in terms of its report of the activities of the committee this year. There is one item that I think we ought to make specific reference to this year, and it's already been referred to in I think it's item 4, and it's the assurance that the internal audit function needs to make on the internal control for the year. And we've heard from Darren that at the moment the internal audit committee the internal audit department appear to be in a position to make that assurance. But I think it is important this year because in the report we note that I think it's 78% of resources and 62% of projects have been completed. This year we've heard that by the current date we're up to nearly 68 and probably going to 70%. But I think it's a valid question of, given the reduced number of projects completed, can we still give the assurance which we've given in future years? So maybe Chris would like to comment on whether that should be included in the report, and if so, how might it be added? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Chris Wood, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. This is a question vexing heads of assurance and internal audit across the country at the moment. It's certainly a topic of discussion at the networking groups that heads of audit attend, and there's a lot of new guidance out from CIPFA and the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors. So I'm reluctant at the moment to give us direction of travel on where my head of assurance opinion will end up until I've furthered my discussions with other heads of audit. That said, though, as Darren pointed out earlier, we'll have just delivered more of the audit programme by the time we get into April. The service assurance statements for the annual governance statement at the moment are out with officers, and I expect to have those back around the 18th of April, all things being equal. One of the things I put in those statements this year is a section trying to understand the other forms of assurance available to me, and the CIPFA and IA guidance does ask heads of assurance to consider other forms of assurance when forming their opinion. So to come to your question on timing, I suspect I'll have a better picture towards the end of April, and by that point could potentially I say when I officially do it will be when we draft the the annual audit report and annual assurance opinion in time for the June audit committee. But I will certainly have a better idea of the direction of travel by late April, I imagine. Sorry, Chairman, my choice of words would have to be quite careful if I committed to something before the end of April in order to get this to council in May.
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. So I'm hearing you say, so I'm therefore going to ask you if you would like to contact all of the audit committee members at the end of April and let us know whether you think you would be happy to write a suitable section, circulate it to us, or circulate to us what you think you would be prepared to do, and in anticipation that you expect that you will be in a position to in order to be satisfactorily reassured, but in the correct phraseology. If you would be happy to do that, then I don't think we need it as a or maybe we do need it as a recommendation. I'll ask you, but to circulate something for us to agree or otherwise, I think that would be very helpful.
I'm happy, Chairman, to circulate some wording at the end of April with the wording making sense in the context of the time. So I'd be happy to take that away as an action if we record that as an action of the committee. Whether you choose to make it a recommendation or not, I'll take it away as an action.
I think an action would do very nicely. Thank you for that. And John Graham, thank you very much for raising that. John Hale.
Thank you, Chair. I really just wanted to comment on item 9.1b and say, based on the conversations that we've been having in this committee meeting, I'm very pleased to see it there because it does refer to the strengthening the follow-up process on internal audit recommendations. So I'm pleased to see that comment is in this report because I think that's something the committee has expressed its concerns about. So thank you.
Good, thank you. And I would like to say that in 9.2, firstly, I want to include the Cabinet members in my thanks because I know how they have been working with their heads of service in order to make sure that the risk registers, do I mean the risk registers? Yes, but I mean internal audit has also been more closely aligned to where our service areas and our Cabinet members have wanted to direct things. So I will be including just an extra few words in there to include them as well. And I do also want to say that because we know, and this is the time to say it, because we know that this is the last audit committee for the 4 years of this council, my thanks are very sincere. Thank you very much, everybody. Hasn't it been fun? What a lovely group of committee members, what an excellent group of officers. And that's both the officers that we see on the screen and in the meeting, but also all of those behind the scenes who help bring the work forward. So I'm sure all of you will agree with me that our officers have done a fantastic job as well. So on that basis, and with Chris bringing for an action, I've seen William's put his thumb up, but not a hand, so that's fine. Thank you, William. Chris has taken as an action a note in April. Do we all agree, what does the recommendation say, that we approve the draft report subject to those comments prior to its submission to the County Council? Could we vote on that, please? And again, mine is hanging in the air, so I'm not going to get through to chat. It'll probably come through in 5 minutes' time, but I'm sure you'll be happy to record that I agree that. And while we're doing that, and still with an eye on the clock, I'm turning to item 8, which is our 2021 audit plan, and this is where we move to the finance papers. And in our pack, for those who are still with us outside the County Council, we're now on agenda pack page 163 on the public papers. And officers, have we got an agreement on item 7? Because I can't see anything.
Item 7 approved.
Thank you very much indeed. So we move to item 8, and I can see Suresh Patel, partner with EY. Suresh, thank you for coming in, and Natalie as well. We are going to have a minute's silence, bang on 12 o'clock, supporting the National Day of Reflection to mark the first anniversary of Britain going into lockdown. So I don't know who will be speaking at that time, but I will interrupt you and call for a minute's silence. And I don't apologise. I think it's the right thing to do. Thank you for understanding. Right, so we're on this report, and what I am proposing to do is take items 8 and 9 together because they both have the same recommendation. And it's very hard for me to have the same recommendation twice, or at least that's what I've got, commenting on the EY audit plans for both 8 and 9. So if you're happy, I'll take 8 and 9 together. Stephen Pillsworth, you're looking perplexed.
No, maybe what we have noticed, Chair, since we briefed you earlier this week, that we think actually probably the recommendation in item 9 should have been worded differently to differentiate it from the audit items in item 8. So perhaps if we were able to take item 8 first, and then when we get on to item 9, we can spell out exactly what we think the issue is. Apologies, we only picked that up yesterday, so we didn't have a chance to pick that up in your briefing earlier this week.
Thank you very much indeed. On that basis, we won't be taking 8 and 9 together. We will be taking 8 first, but I suspect there will be a temptation to move into some of the comments that Stephen Pillsworth might make to item 8. So I'm going to invite Suresh Patel, and I'm sure Natalie Clark will also contribute. I'm going to invite Suresh Patel to present his report.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for accommodating my prior commitments this morning. Seems to be a popular day for audit committees. So yes, we've got 2 audit plans in the papers, one for the County Council and one for the Pension Fund, and we'll take them together, Chair, if that's okay. And these are the 2021 accounts that we are looking at. I'll just give a brief kind of introduction, a bit of a kind of context in terms of those accounts and audit, and Natalie will take you through the risks and areas of focus. I think it's fair to say that the 2021 is the year where we actually see the impact of COVID in the accounts. If you think back to last year, we did spend a lot of time discussing the impact of COVID on things like asset valuations and the going concern assessment and disclosure. But this year is the year actually where the additional spends that you've incurred in terms of the government funding you received is actually flowing through your account. So you'll see that reflected in a risk. We're obviously planning to continue delivering the audit as you are planning to prepare the accounts by working remotely. So that's kind of factored in. It is the year we got the new National Audit Office Code, and I'll come to that in a second about what that means in practice. And I think finally it's worthwhile also just reflecting on the fact that it is off the back of a very challenging year for both accounts preparers and auditors. And you may be aware that there's still about a third of local councils who have yet to publish audited 1920 accounts. So there is strain and stress in the system, and that is reflected in the fact that we, along with other auditors, are still playing a bit of catch up on those 1920 audits. And that's why you might have noticed it's called an outline audit plan, because we've commenced our planning procedures, but we have yet to complete those. But we're sufficiently progressed in order to be able to present you this plan. So that's a bit of context. I'll let Natalie now just take you through the risks and shout, Chair, when you want us to stop for the silence.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. So just to take you on to Agenda Pack page 169, this sets out our audit strategy, but in particular the risks for the audit for this year. We'll take the top 2 items together. These are both of our fraud risks, and these have not changed since the prior year, and our audit response in respect of these items remains the same. So this identifies the ISA 240 around management's position in respect of fraud and management override. The next 2 items are what we determine as our significant risks. And the first of those is the valuation of land and buildings, which remains a significant risk due to the nature and the size of the balance, and particularly the estimates and judgments that are involved. Moving on to the pension liability, this is a similar risk due to the nature and the size in respect of the large estimates and judgments that are involved in reaching that valuation. And we'll continue to work with the council officers in respect of both of these areas as we have done in the past. Moving on to the next item, which is accounting for COVID-19 related government grants. Just pausing in case it moves to 12 o'clock. This is a new area.
Yes, it is. Thank you. I'd be grateful for the minute silence. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, everybody. And back to you again.
Thank you very much. So just to go back to that one, so a new area of focus for 2021 is around the accounting for COVID-19 related government grants, as this is the sort of first year that we'll see the significant levels of fundings come through into the council's accounts. We've had early discussions with council officers in respect of this, and we'll be happy to have ongoing discussions as the accounts are prepared over the next coming months as to how items should be treated within the financial statements. The final item there on pack page 169 is in relation to the going concern disclosure, and this is an ongoing risk or area of focus from last year, where it was initially introduced as a result of COVID-19 and where we placed, we did some more work in respect of this area. Things have moved on over the past 12 months, but this remains an area of focus. And again, we'll work with the council, building on the knowledge and the input that we had in 1920 in reaching a conclusion in respect of this for 2021. Just moving you on to the top of page 170, this just sets out a couple of areas of focus which doesn't have any change from the 1920 year. And in discussion with officers of the council, we're aware that the group boundary assessment is already under review, and once that's prepared, we'll review where that takes us for 2021.
And I'll just continue on the summary part on that 170, just pick up a couple of points. So accounting estimates, there has been a change to the auditing standard around accounting estimates. And dare I say, it actually requires us to be even more challenging of how you derive your accounting estimates, particularly around things like models that you might use or assumptions that you apply. So this is likely to feature in terms of the work we do on the valuations of your assets and the pension liability, which we've mentioned before. Materiality on the bottom of that page, I think it's always useful for you to be aware of what those levels are and to say that they are at the top end of our range. So that's a positive for you in terms of how high they are. So we can't go any higher. Over the page on 171, we just highlight there the fact that this is the year now that the new National Audit Office Code comes into place, and the main change around that is on value for money. So there's a slight change in terms of the 3 reporting criteria that we list there, but the bigger change is in terms of how we actually report to you on value for money. So in the past, you will have seen a value for money conclusion, where we can in effect have a bit of a binary, can we conclude yes or no? Rather than doing that, we are now required to issue what they call a commentary against those 3 criteria. The NAO is cognizant of the pressures in the system this year, so is currently we are currently awaiting guidance about when we need to issue that commentary, because at the moment the code requires us to issue that commentary pretty soon after we issue the opinion on the accounts, or by the end of September at the moment, but that might well change. So whilst the areas of focus might not change that much, the reporting you will see coming to the committee will change. And then finally over the page on 172, just to pick up those 2 points. So timeline, When we were drafting this report, we were obviously aware that the MHCLG had consulted on the timetable. That has now concluded, and they have set dates for you to publish your draft accounts by the 1st of August and for you to publish your audited accounts where you can by the end of September. It's fair to say that all audit firms have challenged MHCLG on the realism of that timetable for the sector as a whole. But you'll see in section 7, and we've agreed a provisional timeline with your finance team to carry out your audit from sort of mid-July through to the end of August, with a view to be able to report to your September committee a concluded audit. So whilst we've got concerns around the sector timetable, we are planning to deliver your audit and the pension fund, I should hasten to add, in line with those timetables. And then finally on fees, obviously we've got a paper next which picks up the fees, but we've been as transparent as we can be about the fees that we are seeking to levy for the 2021 audit. Chair, we'll stop. Should we quickly just move to the pension fund, Chair, just in terms of those risks?
Yes.
And then we can conclude. I'll just quickly pick those up. So that is, if I can get to it, page 211, which is the similar kind of overview. Obviously, far fewer risks and areas of audit focus. The first one about the posting of investment journals is a pretty standard one for pension funds, no change. Similarly, the valuation of your more complicated investments remains a significant risk, and we are aware that I think there's likely to be more of those complex investments in the 2021 accounts. And then similarly around the going concern disclosure in terms of making sure that that's appropriate. So we'll stop there, Chair, and we're happy to take any questions on the plans.
Well, I think I'm, excuse me, I think I'm going to have to apologise to you both that you've only just joined us, and we fully understood why it was better for the finance papers to be taken at the end today. However, we've been sitting here since 10 o'clock, and I think I'm supposed to offer everybody now a break. So I do apologise, but we have a lot of officers behind the scenes as well who also probably need a break. So is that a place for us to take a break? And then we will come back and then we can put all our questions to EY, Suresh Patel and Natalie Clark. Stephen, you've come onto the screen. Are you happy for us to take the break now, or is there a reason why we shouldn't?
That seems absolutely fine. Yes, if we return back and take questions and further comment after the break, yeah, quite happy.
Okay, so it's 12:07 now, so according to my computer. So I'm going to suggest we come back at 12:20. That's marginally below 15 minutes, but I'm sure we can all accommodate that. 12:20. Okay, see you all shortly, and please do keep your computers on because we don't want problems logging in again. Talk soon. Okay. I'm asking officers. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to this Audit Committee of Hertfordshire County Council on Tuesday, the 23rd of March. And it's interesting, isn't it? When we have meetings in person, we don't stop after 2 hours to give everybody a break. We just keep going. And yet, to save everybody going cross-eyed, it seems absolutely the right thing to do. So welcome back, and I hope it hasn't been too inconvenient for people. We did, just before we broke, we invited Suresh Patel and Natalie, I was going to say Natalie Young, and of course I mean Natalie Clark, sorry Natalie, to present their audit plan, and we're on item 8. And Suresh, I think you just got to the stage when you were asking for questions. I'm going to invite Stephen Pillsworth, whose hand is up. Stephen, as we all know, is our, can remember your title, Stephen, but you're very senior finance officer, to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, morning, everyone. Sorry, afternoon now, as it is, of course. Stephen Pillsworth, Assistant Director of Finance here at the County Council. Just wanted to add a few comments, and I think you're entirely right, Chair. I am going to start moving into some of the items or elements of item 9. But firstly, obviously, thanks to EY for the work on this and presenting this morning. It's obviously really good that we've got a plan that should get us through the audit by the September deadline. Clearly, it's very challenging for all councils and auditors at the moment to do that. So hopefully, in our case, we will be able to work that through. And there were some very helpful comments from Suresh right at the start around the impact of COVID, and if anything, having a bigger impact on these accounts than the ones last year. Last year, ourselves and EY had to contend with remote working, but actually COVID had very little impact on the numbers in those accounts, whereas this time, particularly in that grants area, it is a huge issue. So I think that's perfectly understandable why that features as an additional risk. Just a few additional comments from me about the audit plan generally and the content. And I think, of course, you will hear Suresh say around, this is what is needed to deliver a code compliant audit. And it is, of course, the regulators nationally who determine what we need in our account, what standards and what is required in the audit. And EY and ourselves must adhere to that. But I think members will have seen a sort of trend in recent years around the increased complexity and focus of that audit. And that is, of course, off the back of a number of high profile corporate failures, the likes of Carillion, Patisserie Valerie, and regulators have quite rightly required a beefing up of financial reporting and audit standards in those areas. I think with a particular focus around asset values on the balance sheet, the impact of the pension fund and cash, because those are critical for those corporate entities. Those regulators have also required the same issues to be extended into local government. Now, I have some concerns about that for a few reasons. I think, firstly, I don't think audit in local government was necessarily in the same place. Whilst we've had some issues with councils such as Northants and Croydon, I would say actually auditors were flagging those. It was the organisations who didn't really take it as seriously as they needed to. I think secondly, clearly some of those issues around the balance sheet, around cash, are critical in corporate organisations, but actually are in many respects less important in terms of the future financial health of councils. So I have a little bit of a concern that there's a focus perhaps in slightly the wrong areas. And actually, it's really pleasing in many respects. Suresh took you through the changes to the value for money conclusion. And I think, to my mind, that is something moving in the right direction and possibly of more use to councils than some of the other items mentioned. So I'm really interested to work with EY through that and bring that back to you in due course. So I sort of raise it because I think it is important that committee understand the views of myself, and I know a number of my colleagues up and down the country share that view. but stress again, this is something that regulators are determining. It's not something that EY have any flexibility over in delivering the audit. So just wanted to give you that wider background, but just make that final point particularly clear. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And we did spot the strength of your feeling in the letter, which is in the next item. Thank you for conveying the fact that relating to the views from the regulators, they were not at all personally directed at EY, but were directed at the fact that we find ourselves in a I was going to say a system, perhaps that is the right word, a situation, which we find uncomfortable, but it wasn't at all personally EY.
Indeed. Thank you, Chair. And actually, when we get on to item 9, I will link these comments into the letter more specifically.
Right. Thank you. And I see that I've already got hands up from Sharon Taylor and then from John Hale. Sharon first.
Thank you, Chair. I'll resist the temptation to talk about auditing more generally. I have had a recent meeting with the PSAA and, you know, the issues around what's happened in the private sector and that reflecting on local government auditing are well known and well documented in the local government press. I have two specific questions. Thank you, Suresh and Natalie, for your report. The first one relates to that change in auditing practice, and I just wondered, are we close to having separate valuations carried out for the purposes of audit? Yeah, I know that's been talked about widely. Are we going into that territory yet? Because that will be an additional and fairly significant expense in terms of the audit process. And the second one is, I'm asking you for a finger in the air, I suspect here, but the additional auditing that's required in relation to COVID, what's the level of increased expenditure we're going to accrue as a result of that in terms of audit fees? Thank you.
Suresh, would you like to take those now?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. So I think the first one around separate valuation for audit, my answer would be no, because you are preparing your accounts on the basis you're certain your assets have been valued appropriately or are disclosed in the accounts at a fair value. And depending on what type of asset it is, determines then how you valued it and how often you valued it. Our audit is then seeking to get assurance that that valuation is reasonable. So we wouldn't expect you do a valuation just for the audit. You do a valuation to inform the accounts that you're preparing. In terms of the impact of COVID-19.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, Chair. Just to be clear on that, the proposal was that auditors would undertake their own or have their own separate valuations from the valuations that local authorities are undertaking, and that cost would then reflect in the audit fee.
So we will engage our own expert where we consider there to be a risk of material misstatement in those valuations, be that because of the complexity of the asset that's being valued and the kind of the assumptions that underpin that, or be it volatility in the market, depending on what type of asset it is. So last year, at a number of authorities, not this one, that were holding commercial retail assets for investment purposes, because of the volatility in the market, we did engage our own experts to challenge the valuation that was carried out by the council's valuer. So that is not the same as us carrying out a valuation of an asset for the audit. That is us challenging the evaluation that the council has derived. Does that answer your question?
It answers the question for now. Through you, Chair Suresh, thank you. I think there are wider proposals on this, but that's a perfectly acceptable answer for now. Thank you.
And then in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on the audit fees, are you specifically asking about the grant accounting risk that we've flagged, or more
yes,
generally?
Well, that and more generally.
So I can't really put a figure on it, because obviously it kind of depends on the extent of the judgments being made by the council and the grant that actually will be accounted for within the council's book. So where you've got grants that you're just passporting through clearly they just pass through and there's no real audit of those, where you determine that because of the conditions associated to that grant, you will actually account for it through your income and expenditure and potentially sit on your balance sheet, depending on how much you've distributed. That will be then something we would audit. So it kind of depends. So it's hard to put a figure on it.
Okay, let's move on. For those non-financially minded people who have bravely and boldly stuck with us this far in an audit committee, and there can't be very many of them, I think perhaps it's worth saying that the area of real concern in non-financial language is that Hertfordshire County Council pays a consultant, an independent consultant, a qualified one, to have its assets valued. And then our auditors also have those assets valued, and we then have to reimburse you as well for that. And it is that which causes ongoing concern. So I'm going to move on. John Hale. John.
The comments you've made, Francis, and the comments from Sharon have to a large extent covered the ground that I wanted to cover, but I would like to emphasise it. I noted to rest the plan, when you're talking about going concern disclosure, you talk about having early discussions with the management team, and bearing the comments that I've heard around last year's audit, I think that is really important, and that there is a prompt response from Ernst & Young when there are known areas of disagreement on accountancy treatments within these accounts. And I would just, re-emphasise what has already been said about, if we're using third-party valuers to value stuff, then I would hope that Ernst & Young would be able to take significant assurance from those valuation reports and minimise the amount of work they felt was necessary to do, especially in the overall materiality of the accounts. I think, you are being asked to do more, and I think it is, Ernst & Young, EY needs to look at what that means and focus their attentions on the more material and significant areas.
I don't know whether you want to comment or whether the comments that is enough, as it were.
Yeah.
Okay.
To move on, Chair.
Yes. Well, I can't see any other hands up, so I'm going to make a comment myself. I think as well there have been concerns, and this obviously relates to the timescale and the fees. There have been concerns as the timescales have slipped in the past year, and we understand that. But as the timescale slips, then more work has constantly to be done on a going concern basis, because going concern keeps moving. And that has incurred us in enormous costs in terms of officer time. So adherence to a timetable and it not slipping is really important to us. And it would be inappropriate if I didn't make a comment on fees here, in that I think we're all concerned at the ongoing discussions about the size of the claims for additional fees, and also how long this has been going on. I know I don't want to get involved in the detail, but it is causing real concerns. And the longer it goes on, the more we are looking back in history and saying, was that extra work incurred at that stage or not? Because each year moves into another one. So I think there are real concerns in that respect. And I think it would be remiss of me not to refer to them here. So having said that, I very much value the relationship and the relationship that we have with EY, and thank you for working with us and with our officers on an ongoing, very cordial basis. Now, are there any other questions that anybody wishes to make before we go into item 9? In that case, because it was suggested that I should take the recommendation separately, the recommendation on item 8 is that the committee is invited to note and comment upon the EY audit plans for the council and the pension fund accounts, and I think we have noted them. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
I'm just looking to see if we can vote on that, and that means I have to bring up chat again, and no, it's going to be very silly. Officers, please record that I am agreeing the recommendation, and no doubt chat will pop up in about 5 minutes' time. And whilst I can't see it, I'm sure others are voting, and I'm sure in due course officers will tell me what is going on. And meanwhile,
it's been agreed, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. So let's now immediately move to item 9, and the page number for item 9, I think, I made a note of that somewhere. Page 237. So from 237 to 250. And I'm going to invite Stephen Pillsworth, from whom we've already heard, to introduce. Stephen, it says Scott Walker. Are you or your colleague Scott going to be introducing this?
I think Scott and I have just been messaging, because this links back to the comments I made a moment ago in the previous item. Actually, I'll cover this one, and then it's likely to be back to Scott for item 10.
Okay, happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And as I said, a lot of this we've covered in the previous item, and some of the comments there around what's needed in a code compliant audit, and the fact that EY really are unable to influence that. That's what regulators determine. You will see, however, in the letter back to EY from myself around fees, I'm making reference to that quite a lot. And there's really a couple of reasons for that, given what I've just said about actually their inability to change that. Firstly, we know that when you do have any disputes over fees, they are required to be escalated up to the public sector audit appointments body. And you've already heard from Sharon some comments about meetings and their role. And they do play a critical role in the oversight and management of those contracts. So whilst they are not the regulator themselves, they are a very important body in terms of understanding clearly our views around that. So in many respects, a lot of that commentary, because Suresh already knows this is my view, it is with one eye on PSAA getting involved in this, rather than because I think in any way, shape or form EY can change that. You'll see in terms of fees, there's really sort of 3 levels. There's the scale fee, which is set by PSAA, and this is across both HEC and the pension fund accounts. You'll then see there's an uplift, which effectively, again, is sort of out of our hands and EY's hands. It's PSAA who are determining that in line with some of the increased work. And then thirdly, there are some additional fees that EY have submitted to us that they have incurred during the course of the audit. And it is those that our response is challenging. And again, it's where some of the previous points do become relevant. So, for example, you've heard me say, I don't think there's necessarily a huge amount of value added from the focus on cash moving forward. Therefore, I wouldn't necessarily expect to see significant additional fees for that. So that's the area that we are challenging back, rather than those previous components. I think also worth flagging that the comments just now and the ones in the previous item, I think, do very much focus more on the county council accounts. You will see from this letter there are additional fees for the pension fund accounts, but we have less issues with those, and recognise actually that COVID did have impact on those around things like some of the fund manager valuations. Although, again, this issue around cash does feature there, but I would say we're probably more broadly in agreement with the pension fund accounts and fees. It's more around the county council elements around that. So I'll pause in a moment, because I'm sure Suresh will wish to comment. Just in terms of the recommendation, exactly as you noted, Francis, actually in the report, the recommendation wording is identical to the previous one around audit plans. But obviously the discussion is moving on from those and into the letter and fee areas. So it may be that committee might be minded to reword some of that at the end of the discussions. So happy to take any comments and suggestions if that were to be the case when we get to that point. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Suresh, and then I'm sure he and I will be happy to take questions.
I'm just going to make one comment because, again, I don't know whether you gave the page references. So for anybody listening from outside, the details of the fee increases are on page 240, which sets out the proposed fee increase for both the County Council and the pension fund. And then the summaries of that are on the agenda pack page 243. So that's just to help people find what you were talking about. Suresh, I'm sure you'll want to make a comment.
Yeah, and just briefly, Chair. Just as you'd expect, Stephen and I have obviously discussed this in quite a lot of detail. And as you'd imagine, there's some of the letter that starts on page 246, which we don't agree with, but we do agree with the fact that a lot of this needs to be dealt with nationally. I think you mentioned working in a system earlier on. I think that has to be the answer to a lot of this in terms of the national drivers for why we're required to do the things we do. In terms of the actual additional fees relating to additional work that we've done for 1920, clearly we would argue, and that they are justified. We are carrying out our work in line with the code, in line with auditing standards, in line with the FRC requirements. And remember, back in October, I've referred to an FRC report on the inspection of local audit, and EY came out very positively in terms of our approach. I'd accept that if you look at it from is it adding value to the council? Probably not, but the nature of audit, unfortunately, is to follow those auditing standards and provide assurance in terms of that audit opinion, and that's what we've done. But I'd also recognise in terms of there are ways that we can continue to improve to work with the council, make sure we get things done in a timely way, which I think has been mentioned a few times before, and we are taking that on board, and we are working with the council to do that moving forward. So from our perspective, clearly we will be expecting PSAA to arbitrate on the additional 1920 fees, and we await the outcome of their determination of the uplift of the scale fee. I'm happy to take any questions along with Stephen.
Sharon, I see you've got your hand up. Sharon Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Stephen, for setting out the concerns so clearly in your letter. I think there were 2 points that really jumped out at me, which was the paragraph near the top of page 246 about it's misleading and that the focus is not on the area that's putting councils under financial pressure. That's all the property, plant valuations and so on. It's the ability of councils to balance their budgets that will determine whether they're financially viable. I think that's a very key issue here, and I just wanted to draw attention to that. And the second part is on page 247, little b, little I. So it's 2 little b, little I. Specifically, this point is directed at COVID additional work. The extra work was tailored in response to private sector factors which were not applicable or fit for purpose for the local government sector. The greatest example of this was the level of detail required to support a 12-month cash flow forecast. I think we are all suffering, and they are national issues. I'm not saying EY is treating Hertfordshire any different to anywhere else. We are all suffering here from issues that impacted on the private sector, which are not relevant to local government. I think Stephen's absolutely right to draw that to the attention of EY and to the community more broadly, because it's really important. And the fundamental point about this is it's placing additional significant cash burdens on the council taxpayer because of the additional fees we're incurring, which have a knock-on effect. And at the moment, it's difficult to see where that ends. So I know representations have been made from the Local Government Association on this. I know the PSAA are looking at it very closely. I'm not pointing the finger at EY because, as Suresh rightly says, they have a set of audit standards that they have to meet, and they're doing their best to meet them. But we do have to deal with this at national level, because we're all, we've all got issues around financial viability for local authorities. Putting ever increasing burdens in terms of audit costs isn't helping anybody. Thank you.
And I've got no other hands coming up. And I just want to make a comment that sometimes the fact that there is not a lively debate on a topic means that we are so totally unanimous that it doesn't merit everybody saying me too, me too, me too. No, 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 we don't need another me too. I've just spotted another hand up there. The unanimity, I think, that we feel does need to be reflected in the minutes of our real concerns and our support for the arguments taken by our officers, both against the system within which we find ourselves, which has got nothing to do with EY. We all recognise rules, but also the concerns which have transpired as a consequence of some of the delays and the various issues relating to the request for an uplift on fees. I'm just checking. I think John's hand has gone down, so I'm assuming he was doing a me too there. So, John, thank you very much for that. I do want to say how very much I value the close working relationship, which I do believe we have with EY, because when things get sticky, a close working relationship and an openness really matters. So thank you, our officers and EY, for that. Stephen, I noticed your comment on the recommendations, and I'm at a wee bit of a loss on what sort of recommendation you think we should put in. I mean, we could write 20 pages of strongly supporting our officer's letter, but I'm not sure that that's what's needed here. How do you interpret the views that have been expressed by the members of this committee as an appropriate comment?
I mean, I think certainly there's a strong theme running through this discussion and the previous discussion around the general direction of audit nationally. So I think the fact we've made the comment that this letter ultimately will end up with PSAA, I think something along the lines of committee supports the content of the letter, or committee raises concerns around the direction of audit nationally, and supports the content of the letter. Something along those lines might work, unless any members of the committee have any preference or helpful suggestion.
Well, I'm very happy with that. I can see. And John, your hand kept coming up and going down and coming up and going down again. My instinct is to be very happy with that. John, if you wanted to make a comment, and then William, and then Sharon.
The reason it went up was to suggest something very similar to what Stephen then proposed to suggest, which was that it should be, we note or we support the comments of the Deputy Finance Director's letter to Ernst & Young, and note the report on the EY audit fees, or something along that lines as you've suggested.
I quite like raising concerns about the direction of audit nationally, but thank you for that. Sharon? Oh, sorry, I've got William first and then Sharon.
Thanks. Very simply, could we add the word strongly to support, please?
Strongly. Nice suggestion. Sharon?
Agree with strongly, and I think a copy of Stephen's letter to go with a covering letter from yourself, Chair, to the PSAA and to the Local Government Association to help in their work on tackling the more broad scope of national work on audit, I think would be great from Hertfordshire. Thank you.
Right, so let me just try and encapsulate to make sure I've understood. I'm sure everybody else has, that the committee, and I'm sure officers will put the commas and the full stops in the right place. Committee committee raises concerns about the direction of audit nationally, strongly supports the contents of the letter from, I don't mind how we entitle it because it comes from our finance team. Somebody will find the right title on that. And thirdly, asks the chairman of the audit committee to send a copy of our officers' letters to PSAA and the Local Government Association. On that, people I can see are nodding, and I know that EY knows it's not personal in that respect. On that basis, can we please vote? And of course, my chat's not coming up, but you will understand that I'm voting in favour of those 3 points. And from the relaxed look of those I can see, I'm assuming they have voted, and I'm sure officers will tell me when that is carried. And meanwhile, I'm turning on to item number 10, which
agreed, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm now turning on to item 10, which is on agenda pack page 251. And this is the letters of the letters of representation on management and oversight of the County Council, and that includes the Firefighters Pension Fund and of the County Council's Pension Fund. And Scott Walker, welcome, and please present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a brief report just covering the annual letters that we received questions through from Ernst Young, which is part of their audit, looking at the management oversight of processes, looking into control and governance and fraud in the organisation. So these are annual standard letters and questions which they ask us each year. The questions are very similar to last year. We've written draft responses appended to this report for the committee to look at. There's 4 letters attached to in the name of the chair written back, one regarding HCC and one for the pension fund. And then we've also included the letters which will be reviewed and signed by our Section 151 officer, which is like the management side of the same questions and letters and answers. It's a brief report just asking members to look at the letters and to give their comments and approval for submitting those letters back to EY in response to their questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Obviously, I've seen the letters before. I can't see any hands going up, so I'm going to invite committee members to move to the recommendation that the letters of representations, as attached in the appendices, to EY are approved for signature by the chairman of the committee. So again, could we vote on that, please? Which I can't do. It's left hanging in the air again. So officers, you will understand that I'm voting in favour, and perhaps you could let me know when that has been agreed.
Item 10 agreed, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And that's probably the last time, well, it will be the last time that we have the EY team with us today, even though we still have a future work programme. EY, thank you very, very much indeed. All the comments thanking you for working with our officers, warmly meant, and thank you. Thank you for all you've done for us. So let us now move on to item 11, the future work programme, which is at the front of the agenda. So I'm turning back to, and I believe it's down for June 2021, and at the moment it's got a variety of things in it, including the Prevent report, which we were going to bring back just to satisfy ourselves that the County Council monitoring of all of the issues related to the Prevent agenda are satisfactory. And we've also talked about the risk register item that we will be looking at in depth, which will go on there, and it was going to be pulling together all the IT things, including I'm going to use the commonly known phrase, cyber security. That's it. Broadband across the county, the strength of it, and the vulnerability that we have on broadband. So there are no Part 2 agenda items, so we don't need to exclude anybody. Just as we come to the end of the meeting, thank you all very much indeed. It's been a lovely committee over the 4 years, and I wish everybody, officers and members included, well in the election and the future. So thank you all very much indeed. Okay, bye-bye now.
Goodbye and thank you.
Bye everyone. Bye.
Bye, and thank you, Francis, for chairing.
Bye-bye, everyone.
William.